Hi friends, we're back with story time, and this week we're going to read one of my very favorite Patricia Polacco books, and it's a favorite of so many teachers I know. It's called Thank You, Mr. Falker, and it's a true story. This is an autobiographical story about Patricia Polacco when she was a young child. What's pretty amazing about Patricia Polacco is that she writes about kids' real lives, and she doesn't shy away from the challenging things that happen in kids' lives because she believes in kids and their ability to understand their world. So in this book, she explores some of her memories of school and how things were challenging for her with her learning, and things were challenging for her with friends at times. So let's dive in. Even if you've heard this story before, it's so wonderful. Stick with me. Thank you, Mr. Falker. The dedication page, it says, to George Falker, the real Mr. Falker. So she changed his name just a little bit in the story. You will forever be my hero. Let's find out why. Here's the picture on the first page. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that the whole family could see, then dipped a ladle in to drizzled some honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. Stand up, little one, he cooed. I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you. Then he handed the book to her. Taste. She dipped her fingers into the honey and put it into her mouth. What is that taste? The grandma asked. The little girl answered, sweet. Then the whole family said in one voice, yes, and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee that made that sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book. The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon, she was going to learn how to read. Tricia, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her schoolteacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them. And whenever she visited the family farm, her grandfather or grandmother read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all she hoped to read. Each day she saw kids in the 1st grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class had begun to read. Not Tricia. Still, she loved being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around and watch her do her magic with the crayons. In 1st grade, you'll learn to read, her brother said. In 1st grade, Tricia sat in a circle with other kids. They were all holding a copy of Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They say boy and look. The teacher smiled at them when they put their sounds together and got the word right. But when Tricia looked at the page, all she saw were wiggling shapes, and when she tried to sound out the words, the other kids laughed at her. Tricia, what are you looking at in that book, they'd say. I'm reading, she'd say back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always, when it was her turn to read, the teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the 2nd reader and the 3rd reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Tricia began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. The harder the words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and daydreaming, or when she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grasses. As they walked, Tricia said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandma answered. "To be different is the very miracle of life. You see all of those little fireflies? Every one of them is different." "Do you think I'm smart?" Tricia didn't feel smart. Her grandma hugged her. "You're the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever." Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Tricia's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming through from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side, where the light is coming from. One evening, they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. "You know," her grandma said, "all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass, or you'll lift right off the ground, and there you'll be." They laughed and both hung on to the grass. But it wasn't long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass, because she went to the place where the lights were on the other side. And not long after that, Tricia's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder now. Are you following what it means to let go of the grass? Here's the picture on this page. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Tricia would watch the tops of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. "Line up the numbers before you add them," the teacher would say. But when Tricia tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then one day, her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. Even though her grandma and grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and the kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-tone 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. We're going to pause there, friends, and we'll come back with episode 2 to find out what happens to Tricia.